Hey, what's going on, Who That Nation? It's your boy AK, also known as AMBA513. Follow me on Twitter. I just wanted to stop in with you guys and connect with you on some of my insights for this upcoming draft. As we know, the draft kicks off tomorrow. It's a very big draft for our Cincinnati Bengals. Have a lot of needs coming in as far as a brand new receiver, need a little edge rush, possibly a future need at corner, safety. I mean, there's a wealth of positions that we could really use. Anything from receiver to kicker is what we're pretty much looking at in this draft coming up. So I just wanted to give, just my thoughts on some of the subjects. A big topic that's going around now is the first round pick. And when you look at this draft on the surface, I mean, it's loaded with talent with interior alignment, not outside alignment as far as defensive ends for 4-3s, but the interior line has a ton of talent. It's very, very deep. And I'd also say that another deep position for this draft, I mean, it kind of depends, honestly. It's not really too many deep parts of the draft besides defensive tackle. But when you look at the other components of this draft, as far as wide receiver, this isn't a class that blows you away with one of those guys that are an elite prospect. There aren't any Des Bryants. There aren't any AJ Greens. You're not looking at a Mike Evans. Uh, it's a class that has some somewhat talented receivers, but no one that's a dominant top 10 guy. You look at safety, there's a lot of guys there that can be used in multiple positions. So there are a lot of safeties where guys can play safety. They can play a little bit of corner possibly at the next level. You also got some guys that can actually play nickel as well. And then you've got your hybrid guys that are a mix of an outside linebacker and a safety as well. You also have your man corners, and corner this year is pretty thin as far as instant impact guys that can step in day one. You're looking at a guy like Vernon Hargraves, with the only knock being on him is that he's a short guy. And then you also have Will Jackson III, who is arguably the best corner in this draft as far as size and ability, and as far as a guy that can come in and start day one. For the majority of this draft at that corner position, a lot of those guys are nickel corners, and there are a lot of project players that are included in the corner positional area. You also have somewhat of a small, I don't want to say small, but the edge rusher class in this draft, be it, Shaq Lawson, Noah Spence, some of the guys in college didn't produce as much, and it's kind of thin. It's almost one of the thinnest positions in this draft as far as talent wise. So that kind of shook me. I've never thought that quarterback was very strong of a position either. But apparently Carson Wentz and Jared Goff are, I don't understand it, but apparently they're like the next coming of Andrew Luck and Robert Griffin for what the Eagles and the Rams have given up for them. So all around, when you look at this draft, it's a mixed bag. You look at running back two. There's Ezekiel Elliott and Derrick Henry, and then there's everyone else. Not to discredit any of the other running backs or this class, but it's just kind of a mixed bag of draft prospects. You look at linebacker, and you also got some solid prospects. I'd probably say linebacker might be the second deepest group in this draft, possibly, depending on what you want, what you're looking for, depending on what system that they play in. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag, and I've been looking at this draft for literally like months. So I'm pretty well versed in which prospects are what. I've also compiled a my own grade as far as you know prototypical bingo players and what guys they kind of target at each position, and in a sense, it's like a mathematical science based on a lot of aspects of certain attributes that Bengals players that are drafted and were drafted in the Marvin Lewis area really excel in. So, that's something that I've been putting together for the past couple of weeks. But I just want to dive into the number one pick. Now, obviously, receiver is a need. You know, when you have a guy like Mohamed Sanu and you have a guy like Marvin Jones walk away, it leaves a lot of snaps and opportunity open within this offense. It leaves a big hole in the offense. You still have a guy like AJ Green, who is an elite receiver. You also have Tyler Eifert, who came on, but you need to have someone there that can step in and at least contribute somewhat immediately or in the future. Now, the Bengals went out and signed Brandon LaFell, which was a move in a sense I kind of predicted. When LaFell was cut, I was working on a project, following up my project with the free agency formula, which, by the way, predicted pretty much spot on a lot of our free agent contracts that were actually put together. But not to digress from that, Brandon LaFell was a guy, as soon as he got cut, I knew was going to be a Bengals target. He was a guy where he wasn't an unrestricted free agent. He was cut. He fit the size metrics that the Bengals like. He was a guy that was pretty cheap that you could bring in, and he also was productive as well. And he fit the actual age mold for the Bengals as well. So that was a no-brainer. Brandon LaFell, to me, he's a little bit of a Band-Aid, but he's a low-risk, high-reward player. A lot of people forget that 2 years ago in 2014, he was a pretty decent player. He actually had one of his best seasons that he's ever had. He was one of the most consistent, and it's funny to say it because after 2015 he was so unreliable, but in 2014 he was one of the more consistent targets in the Patriots offense. So that's a guy that you bring in, and he can play in the slot, he can play on the outside, and he comes from a winning tradition, and he's a good guy to keep in the locker room. But we know that wide receiver is an issue in this draft. Another issue I would say in this draft is the edge rush. Now, that might catch a couple of people off guard just because, what do you mean we need help on our edge rush and our pass rusher? Well, we've got Geno Atkins. We've got Carlos Dunlap. But outside of those two guys, you don't have anyone that can rush the passer at an elite level. When those guys come out of the game, you notice automatically that there's a drop-off. So, to me, that's another need that we have as far as depth, because the guys behind them, like Marcus Hunt and Will Clark, and even Wallace Gilberry last year, didn't give that production that you look to see from the edge and from your passing downs, as far as getting to that quarterback and providing that same consistent pressure. Also, you look at cornerback. When you looked at past drafts, a lot of people like to say that the Bengals go off the best player available strategy. I believe they do, but not. It might not be an immediate need, but future need. So I think it's a mix of both. When you look at a lot of their picks, one example I can say is Tyler Eifert. Tyler Eifert was viewed as a best player available pick, right? Well, I figured that Eifert was not only the best player available, he also fit a need for Jermaine Gresham, who was in a contract year. And this was around the time where we had to choose between Jermaine Gresham. We also had to choose between Andre Smith, Carlos Dunlap, Geno Atkins. So everyone knew that somebody wasn't going to get paid. And to me, Eifert was just a perfect replacement or a perfect cushion for the Jermaine Gresham backup, insurance if Jermaine Gresham was to leave or we wouldn't be able to afford to pay him. And it worked out perfect. You look at other picks where they picked corners, Drake Kirkpatrick, Darqueze Dennard. These were picks that were made, but there was still a future need. There wasn't an immediate need that year, but there was a future need at that position. You look at the picks last year, Cedric Ogbuyi. A lot of people said, why would you take, two tackles? Well, you had two tackles whose contracts were getting ready to expire when you look at Andrew Whitworth, who had to be re-upped for another year. But, when they took him, Boogie, that is, his contract was going to expire. You had Andre Smith's contract who was going to be up. So there were a lot of guys that were, uh, I guess, future needs and future replacements needed to be made. So in a sense, best player available is their strategy, but there is still a sense of need that goes into it. And that brings me to the other need that I believe, which is corner. You look at Drake Kirkpatrick, he enters his contract year. We renewed his option or we extended him an option for this next year, but he hasn't answered a lot of questions as far as is he worth a next deal? And you look at guys who just went out like Josh Norman and signed huge deals, and you look at the way that the corner market is trending upward. You got guys like Tyler Eifert and Kevin Zeitler that have to get paid, and honestly, I put them over Dre as far as who should be signed first, who should be extended first. I'd even throw Gio out there. So corner is a position that you have to look at. Yes, we re-signed Pac-Man Jones, but you've got Darqueze Bernard battling a shoulder injury to come back, which I think he could eventually replace Dre if Dre does decide to leave. We got a guy in Josh Shaw last year, but corner is still a position where I'm not as satisfied with the depth that we have there and the insurance that we have there. Also, defensive end, like I previously stated, it's almost, in a sense, the same issue that we have there. Another big issue for me is the kicking position, and a lot of people say that a kicker, you can just sign one. I mean, with all of the rule changes that just happened, you really need to seriously look at getting a kicker. I mean, no offense to Mike Nugent, but I feel like if he makes that field goal in that Denver Broncos game, the momentum continues, and we end up having a totally different outcome to that game. You also look at O-line depth. You're looking at a guy at Russell Bodine, who arguably is the weakest link on the defense. Now, the Bengals organization is still high on Bodine. They still want to see what he can do. But if the right center is there, I mean, there's nothing wrong with taking another option. You look at Kevin Zeitler, another example of best player available, but also a future need. If Kevin Zeitler doesn't get signed or he doesn't sign an extension this offseason, you could be looking at arguably your best lineman after Andrew Whitworth being gone. So you have to have some kind of backup plan for a guy like Zeitler, who has been a stud. You also have to look at running back. I mean, when you look at this depth chart from a future need a year from now, the only guy that you're going to have signed is Jeremy Hill. So you have to go out and have some kind of insurance. If a guy like Gio or Burkhead or Pierman leaves, you have to have some guys that can come in and replace them. You also saw in the offseason that two of our guys that were on the practice squad were signed away. So I mean, you got to pay attention there as well. Other than that, I mean, the draft is wide open aside from quarterback. Well, you could still possibly get a quarterback later because they have looked at Cardale Jones. But quarterback and tight end, I think, are the only two positions that may not be a drastic need immediately. So with that being said, when you look at round one and you look at what the Bengals prototypically look for, traditionally they don't pick receivers in the first round. I mean, the last guy that was picked, the only guy, I mean, not even the last guy, the only guy that's ever been picked in the first round in the Marvin Lewis era was A.J. Green. And A.J. Green is a once-in-a-generation, like, wide receiver. Like, the only guy that I had seen, just watching film and being a draft nerd, the only guy that I had seen who looked like A.J. Green on film before him was Calvin Johnson. So, and that was a top 5 pick. None of these guys are A.J. Green. Josh Doctson is more of a mix of a Marvin Jones and an A.J. Green when it comes to attacking the ball. But when you look at this draft class, there's a number of prospects that the Bengals could take in the first round. If you're looking at wide receiver, a guy that checks off all of the boxes and ranks very highly on their board is Josh Doctson from TCU. Uh, you know, the thing with this receiver class is a lot of these guys come out of a spread offense, and a lot of people don't take into account the scheme fit. It's not about just getting a guy or how good a guy is. It's about how that guy fits in your scheme. And you're looking at a class with a lot of spread receivers, a lot of guys with limited route trees. Corey Coleman, everyone knows he's only ran 4 routes in college. How does that transition to the next level? Can he block? I mean, there's certain things that Marvin Jones did that people kind of glossed over. He was a great run blocker. He could run routes well. He came out of the same offense as Corey Coleman. So can they, I guess, catch lightning in a bottle again with Corey Coleman? The Bengals traditionally like to get guys that are about 6'2", 200 pounds. So Jackson definitely checks off the box in that perspective as well. You look at the conference that the guy came out of. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into finding that prototypical Bengals guy, and Dotson, comes in at the top. And then, I mean, you got Andy Dalton as your quarterback. I mean, that's got to be a great vote of confidence for him. Corey Coleman. Corey Coleman, when I initially started looking at the draft, I told guys months ago that Corey Coleman was the best receiver in this draft. When you look at the film, you cut the tape on, the dude is explosive. I mean, the first thing I thought when I saw this guy, and it's not a lazy comparison because it's pretty much the same guy, but it's Kendall Wright. When I looked at Kendall Wright a couple of years ago, I believe we had 24th or 21st pick or something like that. I was hoping that we could land a guy like Kendall Wright. And Corey Coleman is Kendall Wright, like on steroids. Like, he's more physical than Kendall Wright, but he's like legit Kendall Wright 2.0 or whatever you wanna call him. Other guys that kind of stuck out to me that I feel like could be good fits for the Bengals. Another guy is Leonte Carroo. He's a guy that's finally getting the respect that he deserves. Comes out of a pro style offense out of Rutgers. Great fit. A guy that shouldn't have too hard of a transition to the NFL. He's a guy that has, a pro style route tree. He's a guy that can do it all. He can attack the ball. He runs great routes. He's a guy that I could see going in the second to possibly third round, maybe even higher than that, depending on, what other teams are looking for. Another guy that I'm also big on is Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd also comes out of a pro style offense. He's one of the most productive receivers. He actually, before this year and before he had a DUI, was actually considered the best receiver of this draft class. And when you look at his production from college, there's nobody that really comes close to him. So he's another guy that I'm really high on. But looking at the chart for the Bengals draft board, he's sort of in the middle. His calculation kind of comes out a little bit in the middle. We've also heard about Michael Thomas from Ohio State. There's other guys that are later gems like Kenny Lawler out of USC. I mean, not USC, excuse me, UCLA. He's another guy that really reminds you of Marvin Jones. He's very similar to Marvin Jones. He attacks the ball as well. You've got a guy like Braxton Miller he makes explosive plays. I mean, we've watched him at Ohio State transition from a quarterback to a wide receiver, but he's still learning and slowly coming along. So I believe that he'll end up being a great player. It's just going to take him a little bit longer than everyone else. You've also got guys like Sterling Shepard, who is a great receiver. I mean, PFF graded this guy as the best college receiver in 2015. And to be honest with you, I don't really see that much of a difference between him and Corey Coleman. Corey Coleman may be faster. I probably would say that that's the only pure difference between the two. But Sterling Shepard was also a guy who played in multiple offenses. He's more polished in a sense. He's played on the outside, inside. He's around the same size as Coleman. So he's another option that they could look at. But we've seen everyone that they visited with, a guy by the name of Lucien. And if you haven't been studying the draft, that's a guy that you have to pay attention to. He's a super sleeper but he's a guy that's projected to go late. But he's a guy that could come in and still be pretty productive. When you look at the Bengals and you look at the past drafts that we've been in, and you look at 2012, we were in a similar situation, if not worse, than what we're in now. I mean, you that year you had AJ Green, and I believe like the second receiver, my boy out of UC, Armand Benz, was our second receiver. He was starting. So we have Brandon LaFell now. So compare that to Armand Benz as your number two. We kind of just didn't have anything in there at the receiver position. We found two guys that luckily we hit on late. Um, there's another guy in this class, Kiaris Garrett. That's another guy that the Bengals have been interested in. So this wide receiver class, I would say it's not the worst class. There's been a lot of reports of people saying that you just have to jump up in the first round and take a receiver. I personally don't feel like that. There's not a guy in there. Like when you look at Treadwell and you look at, and also Treadwell on my ratings for the Bengals didn't really rank as high. He just didn't meet a lot of the categories that your prototypical Bengals player technically usually meets. But there's not much of a difference between him, Corey Coleman, Josh Doctson. Of course, they're different receivers in the sense of what they can do good or what they can contribute. But these are all guys, also Will Fuller, these are all guys that can't really separate themselves from the pack. Um, like some of our past receiving classes that we've had. So I mean, I don't see the difference between taking a guy like Laquan Treadwell and Tyler Boyd in the second instead, or Michael Thomas in the second instead of taking Treadwell in the first. Um, I mean, you got guys like Roger Lewis. There's a lot of guys in this class that people just aren't paying attention to. And when you watch all the film and you watch all of these guys, you realize that there's more to this class than just Corey Coleman, Will Fuller, Laquan Treadwell. I mean, there's guys out there. Another guy that I like. A lot of people like Michael Thomas from Southern Mississippi. He's pretty good. He does a lot of things well. Uh, Another guy. Let's see who we got here. Um, Another guy that I'm pretty high on is Paul McRoberts. He also met with the Bengals. But Rashard Higgins put up some crazy numbers in college. Like when you look at the prototypical Bengals player, they like to pick guys that are a certain age, and they also like to pick guys that are a certain size and guys that are productive. They like guys that have produced in college. And you have your mixed bag here of guys who produced and guys who didn't produce. And you look at some of these guys that we have here, a lot of them are all over the place. Malcolm Mitchell is another guy who's really high on my board for his fit with the Bengals. So to me, in round one, could you take a guy like Corey Coleman? Yes, you could. It matters how the draft falls. Coleman is going anywhere from, I think I've seen as high as the Texans to the Vikings. I mean, there's an assortment of different places that these guys could fall. Treadwell could go as high as number 10 in New York, even though I don't see him as a top 10 talent. He could go that high. But if you were to ask me who I would pick if I were the Bengals, it would depend on what my board looks like, which this draft is going to be all over the place. But if Noah Spence is there at 24, you must pull the trigger. I have no qualms at all about taking a guy like Noah Spence in the first and taking a Carew in the second or a Sterling Shepard in the second. I have no qualms at all about that because when you turn on the film, this guy looks like Von Miller 2.0. And, when you look at the Bengals draft history, they've only taken one receiver in the first round. They've taken one edge rusher in the first round. A lot of people forget about David Pollack. When Marvin Lewis first got here, David Pollock was one of his first draft picks that he had. I believe we were at number 20. And Pollock was a guy who never got to see the field because he had the career-ending injury. Uh, when you also look at first round, they've never taken a D tackle ever in the Marvin Lewis era, anyway. Of course, Big Daddy Wilkerson, but that was way before the Marvin Lewis era. Uh, but there's a lot of positions that they could be open to. They've taken a tight end twice. They've taken tackles. They taken corners. I mean, corner to me is a position that in the Marvin Lewis era they've taken the most. I mean, twice when they've had the number 24 pick, they've picked a corner. So Noah Spence would make sense for me. William Jackson III would make sense for me. uh, there's an abundance of different kind of ways that they can go. They've also never taken a pure defensive end in the first round, and I think that people get the position misconstrued because you have your 4-3 defensive ends and then you have your edge rushers. Edge rushers, in a sense, are primarily kind of like a linebacker size. They're normally about 250 to 260 pounds, 260 pounds, and whereas your defensive ends are like 6'5", 270 or 285. And the Bengals like those big, long, strong defensive ends. Now, Carlos Dunlap just happens to be a guy that's of that build, but can also rush the passer. So when you talk about pass rusher or edge rusher, you're talking about a guy like Von Miller. You're talking about a guy like Noah Spence, Khalil Mack. These are guys that have an instant impact on what you do. And to me, the Bengals are in a championship or bust mentality and mode right now, whereas you need a guy that can come in and provide an instant impact. Now, Corey Coleman and Josh Jackson both do that. I'm not saying that they don't. I'm just saying that a guy like Sterling Shepard and Leonte Carew or Kenny Lawler can also do the same thing. So to me, I would pick Noah Spence because Noah Spence is a top 5 talent. Edge rushers usually go in the top 5, top 3, and you're getting a guy like that at 24. You have to think about pulling the trigger on him. The other thing is, a lot of the times edge rushers don't fit in a particular scheme. Well, the great thing about Spence is he comes out of a 4-3 where he plays a hybrid position already. So there's no issue with him coming in and immediately contributing on passing downs. So he doesn't primarily have to play every single down, but he can come in and still provide an impact. Another position I'd also consider if William Jackson III is on the board, you have to consider him. You look at corner. To me, the game that stuck out the most last year was the Arizona Cardinals game, and you saw what our secondary looked like when it was depleted. I believe Leon Hall got hurt in the game. If I'm mistaken, please correct me, but I believe we were down like Pac-Man. I think Pac-Man played. It's hard to say. It's pretty foggy now because it's so far in the future. But I remember there was a point where we had safeties on the field playing corner. That's how thin we were. And Carson Palmer used that against us. Like, he specifically came out in 5 wide sets because we didn't have enough corners to stay on the field. I know Darqueze Dennard got hurt that game for sure. So that kind of scared me because Leon Hall hasn't come back. He just had back surgery. He's still not, in a sense, a lot to retire or go away, but you do have, in a sense, a slight hole there. And if you decide not to sign Kirkpatrick next year, you have to have a guy that you can slide in there. And Will Jackson III is a guy that I'd have to definitely consider. You've got a guy like Vernon Hargreaves. Vernon Hargreaves is, to me, when I look at him on film, he's the best corner. He's got the most technique, fluid hips. The only thing that hurts him is his size, but I take technique over size any day because look at Drake Kirkpatrick. Drake Kirkpatrick, not to slam him, but he's an athlete. He's 6'3", but his technique isn't there. And Pac-Man is a huge technician. Leon Hall is a huge technician. Technique matters. So Hargreaves is a guy which he should be going, honestly, in the top 15, top 10. He's the best corner in this draft. But if he slides down because of his size, you have to consider a guy like Vernon Hargreaves too. A lot of people want defensive tackle. To me, there's too many defensive tackles in this class for you to take a D tackle in the first round. And this is a year where um, you're gonna get guys who should have went in the first round in the second round, and vice versa. You're gonna get guys that should have went in the second round in the third round. And when you look at the Bengals draft history, they've done an excellent job of getting these guys late. When they pick those guys in the second round, they tend to not work out. I mean, the third and the fourth round have been great spots for them to, pick up those defensive tackles. People are, clamoring for the Bengals to pick a D tackle in the first round. Do you not realize that Geno Atkins was a fourth rounder? Like Geno Atkins, one of the best defensive tackles in the draft or in the NFL, excuse me, was a fourth rounder. Pat Sims was a third rounder. So you don't need to go out and, throw away a first round pick on a guy that's going to be just as productive as somebody in the second to fourth round, maybe even fifth round, with how deep this is. So to me, I don't think that you have to pull the trigger on a defensive tackle. Offensive tackle, I'm pretty sure that we're pretty good there. You look at guard. Guard is interesting. The only way I see them pulling the trigger on a guard is if it's a guy that can play center and guard. And that would be, in a sense, an insurance pick for Zeitler or Bodine. I feel like a guy that could replace either one of those guys would be what they would look at, but that's not an instant impact position. You transition over to linebacker, and now we're not talking about edge rushing linebackers. We're talking about strict linebackers. We're talking about guys like Darren Lee, Reggie Ragland, Kentrell Brothers. So to me, when you look at this linebacker class, Jalen Smith was the guy that was supposed to be number one. He had an injury. When I looked at his size and his numbers, he kind of, in a sense, now I don't know if he's lost weight or what it is, but he kind of measured up as a strong safety for the Bengals. So he's a little bit on the small side for what the Bengals kind of like at their linebacker position. I also looked at Darren Lee. Now, Darren Lee is an intriguing pick to me, and Darren Lee to me is one of the best linebackers in this class because when you turn on the film, the guy can cover. He's one of the best guys in coverage. He can rush the passer. He can tackle, wrap up. He makes plays. He had interception returns. The guy's an athlete. Everything that they say Miles Jack is, to me, is what Darren Lee really is. So, to me, Darren Lee is, I would probably rank him number one. I would say Reggie Ragland is a guy who is polished as well. For the Bengals, he would play a multitude of positions. He could play all three of the linebacker positions for the Bengals. I'm not sure if he's as good as a pass defender. He's not horrible, but he's not as polished on his pass defense as a guy like Darren Lee is. But he's a guy that could also be an option. But the top graded guy, when I looked at linebackers, was Kentrell Brothers, and that's a guy that's interesting. Depending on if he would fall to like the third or fourth round, I think that would be the range that they would kind of look to address linebacker at the earliest. They have had a history of taking a linebacker in the first round, but in recent history, they've kind of softened away from that ever since they found guys like Montez Burfict and Emmanuel Lamore. They've kind of had a pretty decent agenda of finding linebackers anywhere. When I listen to some of the Bengals interviews, and I'm a Bengal head, so I listen to all of them. I love everybody's podcast and all the videos. And one thing that Paulie G said was that the only position that I look for in the first round is edge rushers and corners. So if we do go with one of those two in the first round, it wouldn't shock me. Defensive end it's kind of a weird proposition this year. I mean, you look at guys now. Initially, when I watched film, guys like Shaq Lawson stuck out to me. Jonathan Bullard, he's more of I'd probably say a defensive tackle / defensive end, kind of a little bit in that Wallace Gilberry mode. there isn't any of these guys that really like stick out. Like even Joey Bosa, I have nothing against Joey Bosa, but his production was, yeah, it was like hit or miss, and it makes you wonder if some of his production fell off without him having Spence on the other end. To me, Noah Spence, even though he's not a defensive end in a 4-3, he's an edge rusher. He had like the more explosive and pure pass rushing skills. Outside of some of these guys like Shaq Lawson and Kevin Dodd, oh, it's a mixed bag here. You're looking at Kevin Dodd, who can play the inside and the outside and rush the passer, but Kevin Dodd is a very raw prospect. He like I believe he had only played a couple years of high school football. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he's a very extremely raw prospect. And look at other guys here. Shaq Lawson. Shaq Lawson looks great on film, but his consistency and his production in college scare me. Like the guy was a backup for 2 years in a row, and literally only really played last year. So you're putting a lot of stock in a guy who had a great year, but it was 1 year. Emmanuel Ogba. He's the guy that grades out at the top. He's the guy that I think if the wide receivers that they want are off the board, like a Coleman, a Will Fuller, a Dotson, I think that if they decide to trade back, which I think there's a strong possibility that they'll trade out of this pick, depending on how their board falls. But Emmanuel Ogba is a guy that was very productive. There's another guy by the name of Matt Judon. He's more of a small school prospect, but his production in college was very strong. But it really scares me because a lot of these guys aren't really that productive. And I hear a lot of guys talking about Carl Nassib and all of that, but Carl Nassib is just okay. He only had like one good year too. So these are guys that will be considered, and eventually I will share some of these rankings with you. If you want to look at some of my rankings, they're actually on my Twitter at AMBA. Is posted right there. But a lot of these guys aren't really as productive as you would like them to be. I mean, DeForest Buckner is probably the number one guy, and according to a lot of scouts and everything, he is the number one guy. But he's more of a run defending defensive end. He's not like a JJ Watt. There isn't a JJ Watt in this class. So defensive end, I'm kind of going back and forth, but I don't think they go defensive end because you're looking for guys that can back up Carlos Dunlap and back up Michael Johnson. So, maybe in the second round, I don't think they'll wait too long to get a defensive end, but I don't think that it's a pressing need that you need to spend a first round pick on one unless the right guy is there. To me, in my opinion, I prefer taking an edge rusher in Spence over a 4-3 defensive end in this draft. I mean, as bad as Marcus Hunt is, I don't think his replacement is in this draft. Let me just put it like that. We move on. Quarterback is an interesting spot. I really only see them going quarterback if a guy like Cardell Jones is there, and we see the A.J. McCarron factor of a guy that's not supposed to be there, that's there in the fifth round. Maybe there's a chance, and I feel like they would only do that if they knew they had a deal for McCarron, which I think they're very comfortable with McCarron, and why shouldn't they be? McCarron is a guy that, is a guy that played in and stepped in and played very well. He was a guy that almost led them to their first playoff win. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with McCarron. All these other guys, I mean, it's no need to really talk about quarterback. Let's just be real. Like Andy Dalton is here. He's arrived now. But the intriguing position that I could see them targeting in the fourth round, as early as the fourth round, is running back. And you look at some of the guys in this class, and it seems like they're looking at replacing Gio more so than Hill because Gio is a free agent next year. So they've talked to a guy like Tyler Irvin, who is a pretty explosive guy. I'm not going to lie, I haven't looked too much at the running backs, but, using some of these calculations, I have a general consensus of which guys kind of stick out for the Bengals. And some of the guys that I'm looking at and that I see are Paul Perkins, Alex Collins, Jonathan Williams, Kenyon Drake. So, there's a lot of guys that they could go with. Kenneth Dixon had a great combine day, but combine doesn't always transition into actual great football player. I'll take a person's film over a 40 time every day. I don't care how many bench reps that you did. You got to know how to play football at the end of the day. So, with that being said, um, I think that they are in the direction of looking at a receiver, but only if the right receiver is there. If those guys are taken, which there's a great chance that they could be taken, they could look elsewhere. I'll give you guys my top 5 players. Now, these guys are all in different rounds. But after doing my calculations, Carl Joseph actually ends up being the #1 player on my board. Carl Joseph is an intriguing guy. If he falls to the second round, I could easily see them swooping in to grab this guy. He's almost in a sense the Cedric Bouye of safeties. He's a guy that was the top safety in the class, had a knee injury, had a yellow medical flag, excuse me, and he fell. But there are still reports saying that he could still be a first round pick. A lot of teams may still consider taking him. But listening to one of the NFL doctors, he stated that if a team was to take Carl Joseph, it would have to be a team that's willing to be patient, willing to have options at safety. And I think that he's a guy that could be in contention for that second round pick. Now, there are other guys that intrigue me as well if they don't go corner in round 1. And one of my guys is Sean Davis. Sean Davis is a safety out of Maryland, but in the Bengals system, he could almost, in a sense, play safety as well as a corner position. So he could show a little bit of versatility. A guy that I'm real high on is Jalen Mills as well. That's another guy. But there's so much versatility in this draft. I'm almost forgetting to give you guys my top 5. So #1 is Joseph. #2 is Josh Doctson. Adolphus Washington is #3. I wouldn't be surprised if you hear his name called by the Bengals, whether it be the second or fourth round. If he's still there, which I think there's a good chance he could be there, he's a guy that I see the Bengals going after. Another guy, Austin Johnson out of Penn State. This guy hits all of the metrics too. You also have Kentrell Brothers. So, I mean, there's a lot of guys in this class that could go either or. Excuse me for 1 second. I'm going to pull up my complete rankings so we can get the guys that I want to see that are a possibility to go in the first round. So I have a big board that I've constructed of strictly the guys that are in the first round. And the way that I think that this works for the Bengals is they have their guys. And I mean, there's actually a video out. A good guy to follow if you're ever looking at Bengals information. Paul Daner and Jim. I don't want to butcher your last name, but you guys do a great job at Cincinnati.com. And they always have insightful videos. And one of the videos that they have right now is what the Bengals do, like how they go about the entire process. So if you take a look at that on their website, you can kind of see how they compile their big board, which is something that I'm going to try to do this year, just to see how it works out. This is my first year ever trying to do this, so it's kind of like a trial run to kind of see how it works. Kind of like how my free agency predictor was, which was pretty spot on. But, it's just to kind of see and get a grasp of what the Bengals are thinking, because that's the unique thing about our team is nobody ever really knows what they're doing. Like, they hide everything. So it almost makes you the ultimate fan because you have to go through and kind of, give your thoughts on what they're going to do, predict what they're going to do, because they're an unpredictable team. And I like it being that way because there's more suspense and you kind of, in a sense, gain a greater appreciation of what they do. And you have to give them the respect. I mean, even if you don't like the pick, you know that they made the best pick, or there's something or somebody, whether it's the scouts or whether it's Duke Tobin, that has a reason for taking this guy. So you can't get caught up on that. But what I'm gonna do for you guys is I will actually post my big board on my Twitter. So if you check out my Twitter, it's right down there. I'll post it there. I'll probably post a link later. But continuing on, another guy that's high on that list is Carew, Malcolm Mitchell, Jalen Smith grades out high on it as well. So keep an eye out on Jalen Smith, even though his medical flag was a red flag. Cedric Abuyi last year was a yellow flag. So that just gives you some perspective on the difference. Nick Martin is on there, Kevin Beard, Corey Coleman, Sean Davis, Sewell Cravens. So these are guys that you could see in stripes next year. Um, just to give you guys a quick sneak peek of my first round that I have here. Let's just do this quick little filter. I like to use spreadsheets because they allow me to operate more efficiently and they're pretty accurate. A lot of the analytics is starting to take over now. But here's my ranking of my top 10 right here. So we've got Josh Doxson, Corey Coleman, Emmanuel Agba, Leonard Floyd, Ryan Kelly, Reggie Ragland, Sheldon Rankins, Noah Spence, Ronnie Stanley, Mackenzie Alexander, Vernon Butler, Kevin Dodd, Will Jackson III, who has the same grade as Mackenzie Alexander, by the way, Jack Conklin, Vernon Hargraves, Jaron Reed. So, I think that they're going to do a process of elimination and they're going to pick the best available player. But I just wanted to drop you guys with a little bit of insight. My wish, again, is Noah Spence. Will it happen? It might not. If I had to hedge a bet, I'm gonna side with Lap. Dave Lapham is a guy who's a great figure for the Bengals, and he's been spot on with his drafts. So I'm gonna go with Will Fuller. We'll see. I'm not huge on Will Fuller, but if they like something about Will Fuller, there's a reason why. So I would want Will Jackson III. I would want Noah Spence, but I'm gonna go with what Lap said, and we'll go with Will Fuller. Hopefully it's Corey Coleman, but we'll take Will Fuller. So leave me some comments. Let me know. Shoot me some tweets. I don't have many followers. I'm letting you know that right now. I have knowledge. I just don't have the followers. I just haven't really been able to dedicate too much time into Twitter. A lot of the time you'll see me tweet stuff here and there, but if you look at my timeline, you'll see that I have a lot of information on there, and how my feelings and certain things come out. So check that out, and I'm pretty sure after the draft I'll try to get all the guys on here and we'll do a draft recap and see how things go. But my boy Moody said, and this is dream scenario, probably not gonna happen, but dream scenario would be Corey Coleman in the first, Noah Spence in the second, and I would lose my mind. But we'll see how things go. But take it easy, Who Dat Nation. It's your boy AK. I will get with you guys later. I have to make a run, so y'all take it easy.